Hello, Shuffle Bus subscribers and fellow friends of the Shuffle Bus that are not subscribers. I'm Jesse, one of the hosts here at the Shuffle Bus, back with a brand new video discussing the Scholar of Ruin, the new Rowan Phoenixborn, coming out here very soon to Ash's Reborn subscribers, and then in about another 90 days or so to all of the retail friends. This video, and like all videos on the Shuffle Bus, are going to be aimed primarily at the discussion of Rowan and his potential impact on the competitive scene, both an analysis of the Phoenixborn himself, as well as his loyalty cards, and then the additional 10 cards or 9 cards that come in his set that are used throughout the game of Ashes, and whether or not those cards have potential impact on the competitive meta. Laid out before you here is the entire deck of Rowan. His loyalty package includes the card Discovery, which has a basic cost and a discard cost. That's a real cost in round 1 that will have to be looked at. It allows you to search your deck for a red raindrop, attach it to Rowan, and then shuffle the Discovery card back into your deck. Each red raindrop allows you to deal a point of damage to a unit in play, whether on your battlefield or your opponent's. So when you have 3 red raindrops attached to Rowan, you're dealing 3 sources of 1 damage to the board. The red raindrop itself we'll talk a little bit more about, but you do get 3 of those, and then once you have all 3 in play, it'll allow you at the end of the round to trigger a Reborn Chimera, which is a 4/4 unit with essentially Overkill 3. Package includes 3 allies: the Crypt Guardian, Knowledge Seeker, and Ritualist. It has 3 ready spells: Chant of Hostility, Summon Ruin Dweller, Chant of Erosion. The Ruin Dweller is a conjuration. It's a 3/2 with an ability. We'll get into that a little bit more detail. And the Erosion brings with it an Eroding Alteration conjuration. We do get a package of 3 action spells as well in this set: Era's End, Excavate, and Rapture. We're going to go over each one of these in their entirety and talk about their impact on the competitive meta. So let's talk about, to start, let's talk about the Discovery Red Rain Chimera package. And in order to do that, we do need to start with Rowan himself. Again, mentioned before, Battlefield of 5, Spellboard 5, 18 life. This is a pretty average stat line. Not anything that's super out of bounds here for Rowan. He's got this Conscript ability, which says after an ally you control is destroyed, you may place it face down under this card, discarding any allies underneath it. So the May component of this means that you're not forced, and your opponent can't control like what ally is put under Rowan. So if the ally doesn't have an enter the battlefield effect or a destroy effect, you don't have to put it under Rowan if you don't want to, which I think is important from the wording perspective. The Exhume component is a main action and exhaust and a single basic, and you can place that ally that was underneath Rowan onto the battlefield and then destroy it. Now, before you get any ideas of looping allies here, the Exhaustion component of Rowan will prevent that ally after it's destroyed from coming back to go underneath Rowan again. So you can't just kind of create this round over round looping the same ally. You get 1 free loop out of an ally per round. Okay, nothing on Rowan's stat line or on his ability really says, oh my goodness, this is going to be one of the best Phoenixborns in the game. I do think he has the potential to be very powerful and very combo-like. We've seen combo Phoenixborns like Auric in the past struggle to sort of find their place in the competitive scene, but that doesn't mean that Rowan is excluded from being viable. I think it's very possible that Rowan could be extremely viable. Although I will say that the 5 Battlefield and the Fallen in particular could be really problematic, since there are 7 Fallen in your Conjuration pile. You're never going to be able to excel beyond that, so you're going to definitely need quite a bit of self-clear in Rowan to make the Fallen package work extremely well. And I think Rowan's real power relies on their engine of the Chimera Discovery, Red Raindrops, and that whole package. So let's get into that Discovery package here. Discovery is Rowan's unique action spell. It is a main action and a basic to play it, plus discard a card from your hand. So you do need to have a spare card in your first 5. Or you need to have a card that allows you to draw cards in your first 5. This could be done through something like an Abundance. It could be done through Swift Messenger. There are other draw cards. You can certainly try to do Wishing Wing, although you'll have to somehow get the Wishing Wing killed to draw a card. You can play Squall Stallions here and draw the card off Squall Stallion and not Torrent. There are certain things you can definitely do here to make this work for you, but you're going to need some sort of draw card on round 1 in order to enable the Discovery and not play a first 4. It allows you to then attach a red Raindrop Conjured Alteration spell to your Phoenixborn and then shuffle this card, the Discovery card, back into your draw pile. So you'll always have 3 Discoveries in your deck until you manage to get all your red Raindrops out, and then the Discoveries are probably at best meditation fodder, which is perfectly fine as a combo piece. So let's talk about the red Raindrop. I mean, if we're playing Rowan, this is what we're really trying to take advantage of, because this is going to have the biggest impact on the game. It's not going to be a piece of the puzzle it's going to be a piece of the puzzle that leads to a bigger win con. And whether or not that win con is good enough, we'll talk about, and whether or not it gets there at the end of the day. But we have the red Raindrop, which is a Conjured Alteration spell attaches to your Phoenixborn. One of the nice things about this is we have very few things that actually interact with attachments on Phoenixborn. I think there's none. And that means that the red Raindrop is not going to be interfered with or messed with once it's in play, which does make the cost of Discovery feel a little bit better overall, and the work that it takes to set up that first Discovery. It says, at the end of the round, you may deal 1 damage to a target unit. Okay, so we know that you got to go all the way through the recovery phase. Once you've completed the recovery phase, then you trigger end-of-round effects. And so those end-of-round effects are anything that says at the end of the round do said things. These are going to be things like Admonisher. These are going to be things like Blood Puppet. There's a few others, but ultimately, they're these things that have to sort of survive until the end of the round, and then they do something. The nice thing about end of round in particular is there's no opportunity windows for opponents to react or play or take action. So red Raindrop is a very good killer of Vampire Bat Swarm. It's also potentially possible that with enough red Raindrops you can interact with the Creeper in a positive manner, Indigo Creeper, but again, that's going to be based on critical mass. So really what we're doing with Rowan competitively is trying to figure out if we can build an engine that allows us to set up all 3 red Raindrops as fast as possible. And that engine is going to be a little tricky, but I think it is possible to do. And so we will eventually start doing some deck building with Rowan to try to enable this, because I think that's the consistency component, is how quickly can you bring on the Chimera. This says, if there are 3 red Raindrops attached to your Phoenixborn, place a Reborn Chimera Conjuration onto your battlefield. Again, this all happens at the end of the round, so not only are you going to get to deal 3 damage, but you're going to get to summon a Chimera to the battlefield. So let's take a look at that Chimera and see if it's worth it. So the Chimera is a Conjuration count 1, meaning that there's only 1 Chimera in the deck. It has a 4 stat line attack, 4 stat line life. There are very few units in this game that have 4 attack. This is online with the Gornrock Brawler in terms of attack, not on life side. Obviously, I think Brawler potentially is better, but the Brawler has a pretty significant 4 dice spell cost, whereas the Chimera just has the setup requirements. So once the Chimera is in play, it's going to be something that even if your opponent removes it, they're going to have to react to it round over round. So they're actually disincentivized from killing it. So it's going to be something that, you know, your opponent's going to probably end up chump blocking it a lot, because it's better to take 3 than 4 because they're of the Overkill 3 ability. So Overkill 3 says, after this unit destroys a unit opponent controls by attacking, deal 3 damage to that opponent's target Phoenixborn. This could pair really nicely in a Piercing Light style deck if Piercing Light is playable. Up to this point in the meta, we have not seen Piercing Light be a setup card that has had an impact on the game. But a single Piercing Light turns this into Overkill 4. Second Piercing Light turns it into Overkill 5. And third Piercing Light turns into Overkill 6. So just playing the Piercing Lights to the battlefield will essentially power up the Chimera, and only a handful of units can actually not die to it. Those units are going to be Archosaurus. They're going to be Sunshield Sentry, another unit that's coming out in this set, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then that's pretty much it, I think, for 5 life. Archosaurus, Sunshield Sentry, Gorn Rock Brawler, excuse me. So, again, you could see a Root Armored Knight get in the way of this, so you might find yourself in a position where the best course of action is to support this with Adept Duelist or some other smaller unit that plays into your ally suite package to make sure that Root Armor doesn't become a problem for you. I do think this unit is worth it. I don't know how much at this point in time, since these cards are all new and this is just my off-the-cuff reaction to this set, but I do think we have a very strong chance that the Chimera is going to be a competitive threat. And it's going to really depend on how well the consistency engine is in setting up the red raindrops. Can that be done quickly and efficiently without relying purely on luck of the draw? So let's get into the meat of Rowan's deck now. We know that the Phoenixborn components are interesting and can do something powerful, and certainly the 4/4 that is essentially unkillable. I mean, it's killable, but it comes back means that your opponent's wasting dice and tempo while you're continuing to maintain tempo pressure with this card round over round. So the first card that we're going to talk about, we're going to dump into the ready spells. We're going to talk about the Chant of Erosion. So Rowan's bringing a package of chants to the table. We'll see more on this chant engine, if you will, soon. The Chant of Erosion is a ready spell that has a side action and a ceremonial class class cost. The thing you'll notice about this particular card is it falls in line with all the other chants in terms of cost. It says, just like all the chants, after an ally you control is destroyed, place 1 status token on this spell if it has no status tokens on it. So, can't stack tokens like you can on the Fallen books, but every time an ally dies, you put a token on this, so power of chants rely on multiple chants being put into play. It does have a main action cost for a chant, which is nice, because the deck, I could see this deck being side action hungry. And so the main action of exhaust, remove a status token from the spell to attach an eroding conjured alteration spell to target unit. So let's take a look at that eroding conjuration. Basically, the eroding conjuration says give a unit -1 attack, -1 recover, and then at the end of the round deal 1 damage to the attached unit and discard the spell. Okay, so the -1 attack, -1 recover is relevant and good, because if you have a unit with 1 recovery, it actually does get there in terms of reducing the overall effectiveness of that unit. 2 life unit with recover 1, looking at Winged Lioness and some of the other units in play, or allies that exist, allows you to put 1 point of damage on there. The recover 1 value will be reset to 0, and then at the end of the round it takes the last point of damage and it dies. This does potentially save you some dice in removal of said units that are like this. I think more often than not, this is going to be used mostly for the minus attack and to kill 1 life units on minus attack. And again, because it's end of round, Eroding is very good at dealing with things like Vampire Bat Swarm and a few other sort of effects that would normally be problematic with that 1 damage output. Because the Eroding falls off at the end of the round, it's not like you can stack this round over round to eventually kill a knight or do something of that nature. So I'm not sure how I feel about this card yet. I think its potential is its floor is pretty low, and its ceiling is not very high either. So generally speaking, that's in a vacuum analysis, that's that kind of puts you in a place where the card is okay, and it might be more effective than we think. It certainly has some interesting play when you talk about some of the more rush-style decks that are out there. Although the rush-style decks tend to go really fast, and chants are very difficult to set up, so I'm not sure it actually gives you much play to stopping the rush. It would be more just to clean up the rush. Okay, so after we get past the Chant of Erosion and the Eroding Conjuration, we move on to Chant of Hostility. This has got the same class, has the same effect as the Chant of Erosion, so ceremonial class to play, side action, This one does have a side action, which is very effective with combat tricks. And so the side action exhaust, remove one status token from the spell to add 1 to the attack value of target unit you control for the remainder of turn. The closest comparison to this is probably Strengthen. And it's fine as a Strengthen. It's fine to compare it to Strengthen because it's a little cheaper than Strengthen. One of the downsides of Strengthen is its overall investment, but it has more setup time than Strengthen, so it's possible Strengthen has greater impact in round 1. So if the game remains very quick like it is right now, then I think the Chant of Hostility loses out to the much more powerful and straightforward Strengthen in round 1. Strengthen Gates opens are extremely powerful. Gates doesn't work as extremely well with Chant of Hostility because the Chant of Hostility is has to somehow get another token on it, so that sort of requires another ally to die. I mean, there's a few other components to this that I think make it not quite as good as Strengthen, but it's definitely an interesting card, and it does give you this instant, like this potential incremental value engine that all the chants do. I do think Rowan's best chant is most likely Chant of Revenge, but Chant of Hostility may be potentially there and able to do something in the right builds. Not much more to say on Chant of Hostility right now. It remains to be seen whether or not... I think this is a card that I will be testing early on. Not necessarily just in Rowan, but in other sort of more combat trick-oriented decks, because I do think Chant of Hostility has a lot of play in decks where you're not going to try to do direct damage removal, you're going to try to do combat math advantage. And with the influx of direct damage spells and the rise of Fate Reflection, Particle Shield, and various other things like Golden Veils in decks, I think the combat damage removal component is becoming a very safe alternative, potentially, to some of those direct damage removal tricks. So I think if that meta establishes itself, Chant of Hostility may be the kind of engine you want in order to make good things happen. Okay. Next up, we're going to go to Summon Rune Dweller. This is a new ready spell we're getting. This is the, Ceremonial doesn't have very many ready spell conjurations that have big impact on the game. Really, when you look at the list, there's Fallen, which is very good, of course, but more of a combo engine kind of unit where you're trying to get all the books online, and so you build a large portion of your deck around that and the allies that support it. You've got Dread Wraith, which is not a competitively viable unit at all. And outside of that, we've seen some fringe blood puppets play, but really for the most part, there are not very many ceremonial summons in the game that are worthwhile. And Rune Dweller is definitely working its way towards that. So it's a ceremonial class basic and a time basic. So this is kind of like the Cloudburst Griffin from the last set, and Griffin is obviously an extremely powerful unit that saw big play impacts in the meta. And it's a main action and exhaust to play the Rune Dweller. So obviously the book is not where we're going to spend all of our time talking. We're going to talk about the unit and what it really does. So the Rune Dweller is Blight 1. At the end of the round, or when this unit is destroyed as a result of an attack an opponent controls, deal 1 damage to target Phoenix form. Okay. Competitively, this card's at odds with itself. Make a 3/2 and attack with a 3/2 is a very powerful set of stats. It's a very aggressive stat line. We've seen Cloudburst Griffin with its quick strike ability really change the scope of how games are played. And Rune Dweller has a very similar value. The Blight 1 ability is really narrow. And so as such, I think if you're trying to activate Blight 1, make Blight 1 work, you're probably missing the boat with this card. The downfall to Blight 1, if Blight 1 was not just as a result of an opponent's attack, but also from a card ability text type of effect, where anything that kills it, it deals 1, this would be one of the arguably best summons in the game. The 3/2, and it deals a point of damage no matter what, is just safe burn damage, and I think you'd see this slotted into many, many burn decks. But as a result, burn decks don't generally play to the board very often, like the Brennan burns that we have seen don't. And I don't think you're going to see a 3/2 sit on the board for a long period of time in general. There's just too many ways for them to get killed. Aerodel is a competitively viable Phoenixborn that makes a fair amount of problems for this. As somebody playing Winged Lioness a lot in my competitive decks, I see Lioness being a completely fine trade into a Ring Dweller. And that, even if I do take a point of damage, I think that's completely acceptable versus the alternative. It's interesting. I think you want to be aggressive with this card, and you only want your opponent attacking into it when they don't have any other viable answers. The thing to note about Blight 1 is that it is an exhaustible ability, so if your opponent does leave it around, then the Blight 1 will trigger at the end of round. And so you have an opportunity cost here to force your opponent to deal with it in some sort of proactive manner. The general issue is because it's 2 life. This card would be absolutely bonkers if it was a 2/3 and did the same thing. Okay. So let's, but because it's a 3/2, I think there's enough answers that I'm not sure you're going to get Blight to trigger all that often, but it remains to be seen. I do think if you're in time and you're playing the Cloudburst Griffin, this is a reasonably nice unit to slot next to the Cloudburst Griffin to give you yet another solid guard pressure unit, even if it does trade in combat. And it's important to note that if you're attacking with it, attack is not an opponent countering, so they have to attack into your Ring Dweller. So that's just something to know about the rules of Ashes. So I do like Ring Dweller. I think it's got a possibility of being very strong in the competitive meta. We'll see how it plays out over time. The next card is really going to depend upon the viability of Chant. So Ritualist has got a 1 basic class cost. We love cheap allies, and Ceremonial needs more cheap allies for the Fallen. So I do think Ritualist is feeding the Fallen. When this unit comes into play, you may search your draw pile or discard pile for a ready spell with Chant in its title, reveal it and place it in your hand, then if you search your draw pile, shuffle it. So this is going to enable your Chant engine. Okay, so you make a Ritualist. You have some sort of plan to kill your Ritualist to turn on Fallen books. If you're in Rowan, since this is coming out of the Rowan set, we'll just talk about it in Rowan. You can exhume it and then get your 3rd Chant online. But the thing you got to be cautious about in that concept is that the Ritualist costs you 1, 1st Chant costs you 2, assuming you first 5'd it, 2nd Chant costs you 3 dice, 4th Chant costs you 4 dice. So 4 of your dice for the first 5 are 100% committed to this turning the Chant engine on. Now the Chant engine may be good enough, again, may be good enough, to make it worth it. Chant of Eroding, all of these different things are very potentially viable unit killers, and obviously 3 Chant of Eroding can just shut down a Realmwalker and kill a Realmwalker at end of round. That's something for sure. Now the Realmwalker can still exhaust you. That's possible, but if you're playing these sort of low to the ground units, it might be okay. Again, Realmwalker, Big Knights, that kind of thing, Chant of Eroding looks fairly decent against, providing you put enough damage on to overcome their recovery value, or you put enough Chant of Erodings on to overcome the recovery value. Okay, so Ritualist remains to be seen. I think a cheap 1/1 for 1 Ceremonial is going to enable Chants, and whether or not you go all in on the Chant plan, or you just go, I'm going to set up Chants and gives me a free, it's not a free, but it gives you an extra card in your first 5, is probably worth it. Whether or not you're going to first 5 a Chant alongside the Ritualist, I think is going to be up to the deck build and what else you can do with that deck. Alrighty. Next up is the Knowledge Seeker. Knowledge Seeker costs a time, class, and a basic. Has Seek 3. When this unit comes into play, look at the top 3 cards of your draw pile. Place each card on the top or bottom of your draw pile. Seek 3 is a powerful filtering tool. And if we're in the Rowan package to try to set up the Chimera, I think Knowledge Seeker is going to be played all the time alongside that. In general, 2/2s for 2 in Ashes that have essentially no text unless the unit dies are not very good. But I do think that a 2/2 that lets you filter your deck and get you to your red raindrops faster, if that's your plan, has a place there. So obviously great in the precon. Remains to be seen until we know how good the Chimera is, whether or not Knowledge Seeker has an impact on the game after that. This is notable that you can exhume it, but remember that you've now spent 3 dice to draw 2 cards and look at potentially 6. So that may be enough to get you to 2nd or 3rd red raindrop, but you're going to have to be really cautious with that. And it's going to hinge on how much you want to buy in on the Chimera package. Okay. Now we have a new unit, the Crypt Guardian, coming to play. This is another ceremonial time basic 3-cost ally. We like to call these Knights in the Ashes community. So this would be a new addition to the Knight package in Crypt Guardian. This one is a little different than other Knights. Most Knights have Alert or some other thing. None of them have Unit Guard. This is the first Knight to have Unit Guard. We get a 2/4 Unit Guard with Recover 1. It has Shackle 1. It says at the end of the round, or when this unit is destroyed as a result of a spell, ability, or dice power, you may place 1 exhaustion token on target unexhausted unit. So here's the rub with this guy. I'm not sure I want to spend 3 dice to Unit Guard. Generally speaking, the best Unit Guards in the game are things like Gilder and Butterfly Monk. Those all cost 1 die. A 3 dice Unit Guard has to get a lot of value out of it. And I'm not sure you're going to get that. The 2 attack becomes an issue with the Unit Guard because it's not killing opposing Knights. It survives opposing Knights, kind of. It's not... It's just not getting there. Like, I'm sorry. I'm not sure that it can get there competitively. I could be completely wrong about this Crypt Guardian, and it may be the absolute bee's knees, and we'll see. I certainly was wrong about the Realm Walker. Shackle 1 is a powerful ability. I do think it is potentially worth it. But you have to ask yourself, if you're in Ceremonial, which you would be, and you're thinking about the best things to do with 3 dice in Ceremonial, there's a lot of options on your splash color here. So you could splash Time and play the Crypt Guardian. You could splash Nature and play Hammer Knight. You could splash Sympathy and play Master Vampire. Or you could splash Divine and play Grave Knight. All of those feel much more proactive than this card does. I don't think you're going to back yourself into a corner by playing Grave Knight and Crypt Guardian and going, here we go. The 2 attack 4 life, the 4 life is great. Recover 1 is a little low for Knight value in terms of recovery. Most Knights recover at 2. So I just think the stat line is a little rough on this guy. And I'm not sure that 2 attack, like where you can Unit Guard and exhaust for 2 attack, is going to be worth it. It does have some value play in blocking like first round Frostback Bear, but I think you can just do that better with Sunshield Sentry in the Time dice, or even Beast Tamer for that matter. So obviously Beast Tamer doesn't have Unit Guard, neither does Sunshield Sentry, but I mean, if this is your value unit, then your opponent's going to be attacking something of lesser value with the bear. I think that gives you lots of opportunity to interact with the bear. So I'm just not sure where Crypt Guardian fits into that meta right now. We'll certainly see how it plays out over time. Aha. All right, time to get into the action spell suite. We've got Era's End. This is a main and a side action cost, so it's your whole turn in 1 time class. I love the time class for this because you don't have to meditate into it. It doesn't make it difficult to play. And it says, resolve all effects that trigger at the end of round on unexhausted cards currently in play, in the order of your choice. Okay. There's some conversation going on about who controls the effect, and whether or not you can exhaust do your opponent's effects. Can you do some of your effects, some of your opponent's effects? There's some questions about this, but generally speaking, this is considered, I think this falls under simultaneous triggers in the rule set, and so therefore, because it falls under simultaneous triggers in the rule set, the active player would resolve all of their effects first, and then the non-active player would resolve all of theirs. So if you're the active player, you have the first player token, you would choose all of your effects, end-around effects to resolve first, and then your opponent would do all of their end-around effects. And since it's done in the order of your choice, I would assume you would be able to choose the order for your opponent's effects, but that's another question that's sort of lingering out there right now and going to be requiring an FAQ. This card's not necessarily templated extremely well for understanding how it works inside the framework of the rules. Powerful system here if you're playing something like an Admonisher engine, If you're on Blood Puppets, on all the Rowan effects that we've talked about, this is a way to summon a Chimera for 1 dice in a card. If you've got your red raindrop set up, if you don't have your red raindrop set up, it's 1 dice to ping for 2 or 1. I mean, the floor is 1, obviously, with 1 red raindrop in play. Turns the time class die into a ping for 1 and a main action, which is reasonably good. And I think that this card's going to see some play, especially with Rowan, but it's also going to see some play with other Phoenixborn that have end-around effects or other cards that have end-around effects. Whether or not those cards will impact the competitive meta, maybe. It certainly looks like it would support Creeper. When you talk about the Indiglo Creeper, like nothing sounds better than making a 2-1, attacking with that 2-1. Generally speaking, your opponents don't want to kill that, so then you could Air's End to trigger end-around triggers. You could also do the same thing once you've got the Creeper engine moving forward and you've got the Brilliant Thorns in play, and you've got an Indiglo Creeper in play. You can actually go like attack with Brilliant Thorns, and then Air's End, and then in your controlling of your order, you can kill your Creeper, make a seed, and then have both of your Thorns power up your seed immediately. And then your next turn, you'll be able to make 2 more 3/2 Thorns. So Air's End looks like a huge enabler of the Creeper engine in terms of making the Creeper engine much more aggressive. Creeper has certainly been a competitively viable deck, so I think this card is going to slot into those decks without much trouble, especially in the Hope shells. I think it's got a real opportunity cost that's hard to ignore in those shells. So I would not be surprised to see Air's End be a card that makes competitive Creeper lists later on in tournaments. This may be arguably the best card in Ashes. That's a pretty hot take, but this card is pretty wild. Okay, so we all know that Ceremonial and Fallen in particular like to destroy allies. And destroying unexhausted allies is a cost, but it's not a huge cost. I mean, this card really wants to pair well with Anchornaut. It wants to pair well with Fire Archer. You can kind of take your pick of other 1-cost allies that are extremely good, and Rapture just slots alongside them without any question at all. It's a single class basic, or class cost, ceremonial class cost, and it says destroy an unexhausted ally you control to deal 1 damage to all units an opponent controls. So this is a one-sided AoE. Generally speaking, we don't have any versions of one-sided AoEs. We have 100 Blades from Cole, but that costs 2 basics. We have Mist Typhoon, which is in the Illusion and Nature side, and that does 1 to all of your opponent's units and lets you draw a card. So it replaces itself and wipes your opponent's units off the battlefield. And then the rest of them are 2-sided. Nature's Wrath, which is deal 1 to everything, and Meteor, which is deal everything. So when we think about AoE spells that exist inside the game, Rapture is one of the few that kind of does it all. Obviously, there are benefits to self-clear in Ashes, so whether or not it outstrips Nature's Wrath, I'm not sure. I think in certain decks it could. I could definitely see this slotting into Jessa decks really quickly and being a very powerful anti-swarm card in your first 5. Very easy to set up like immediate Anchornaut into Rapture play, or an immediate Fire Archer into Rapture play. Wipe your opponent's board and really put yourself in a position to accelerate the game state after that. But yeah, we'll see. I do think this card's extremely viable, extremely competitive, and I think you're going to see it all over the place in Ceremonial. It's just that good. Self-clear plus AoE damage to your opponent's board. That's chef's kiss. Let's do it. All right, last card. The last card is Excavate. Excavate has a real cost. It works pretty well alongside Knowledge Seeker because you can make sure that the 3 cards you're discarding, you're not getting rid of an important card in your deck piece. But at the end of the day, I think you're not going to care too much about that if you're kind of playing a hyper-aggressive shell. Time, class, and a basic. Discard 3 cards at the top of your draw pile. If you do, place 1 of them into your hand, so you only lose 2 of the 3. So again, the filtering component of the Knowledge Seeker works well as a combo piece here for the Excavate play. And then once you place the 1 card in your hand, you get to deal 3 damage to a target unit. So this is just a 3 damage removal spell, and those have seen a lot of competitive play. It's we've seen it in Crescendo. It's got a little higher cost than Crescendo, but the main action component of it is not you know an unknown. The only real issue, is you have to have 3 cards of discard. So if you have 2 cards left in your discard pile, then Excavate is turned off. So it's really good in the early game, loses a ton of steam in the late game, and it helps. It sort of turns itself into a problem the later you go. So, I mean, in theory, you could be discarding up to almost a third of your deck, 9 cards out of your deck. And if you think about it, Ashes is really a 25 card deck because your first 5 is your first 5. So, if you don't first 5 the card, you're really talking about getting rid of almost a little under 30% of your deck to play 3 Excavates. The dice cost is real. 2 costs on this is real. It's not a small number, but it is a valuable card, and the draw, looking at the deck and drawing a card to hand is not irrelevant when you're trying to assemble focus pieces and when you're trying to assemble the red raindrops, looking for discoveries or any of those things. So I think in the pre-con it looks very good. I think it's going to be competitively viable. I just don't know if it'll ever be a 3 of in any deck. It's very possible that it's a 1 of card that start, because it solves a lot of the issues that you have with a first 5 Crescendo, where you have to somehow draw a card, so you have to make your first 5 change in some way. This only takes 1 card of your first 5 at the cost of a dice. So I think Excavate is a very strong first 5 card. I'm not sure whether or not you'll see more than 1 copy in competitive decks. I'll be very curious to see how that works out. So there we have it. That is the Scholar of Ruin. It's a set that brings a couple of extremely powerful cards that I think we'll see competitive play. I would say at least 2, maybe 3 of those cards will be competitively viable. The Ruin Dweller, the Excavate, and the Rapture. Those cards look like they're ready to, it's not the Rapture. Rapture look to be cards that will be immediate impacts into the competitive meta for Ceremonial. Whether or not they give it enough of a boost. Right now, Ceremonial is sort of struggling to be a main color class. We are seeing it being played a lot in the Vampire Bat Swarm decks from Hope. I would think that Rapture in particular, as well as Excavate, will fit into the Hope decks without much trouble. It's obviously not as good as Void Pulse, but another version of Void Pulse in Hope is not going to be bad. It gives a nice filtering effect to Hope to help her find her Void Pulses. And so I do think that we'll see those things continue to evolve. But I think those 3 decks look pretty solidly set up for it. I do think that Excavate is a card that might see play in the Creepers decks, but I do think Rapture will see play in the Creepers decks because it just helps enable the Creeper engine that much more. And obviously there's a few other cards that I think might help Creepers. Chant engines, we'll see if the Chant engines can be competitively viable, or if those are going to be kind of more reserved for your casual kitchen table style play. But I think my gut instinct tells me the Chants are not going to be good enough or fast enough in the competitive meta that we have today. Come back to the channel soon to see my thoughts on the Ocean Guard set that's coming out with the new Phoenixborn Tristan. If you like this kind of content, nothing says that you like it more than hitting that subscribe button down below and giving us a thumbs up on the video. Leave a comment below. Do you think my takes are good? Do you think my takes are sound? Or are they off? I want to hear from you. Do you think I'm missing the boat on some of these things? And as always, I want to thank Plaid Hat Games for making Ashes and continuing to support it through the PDP system. And we will see you all in the next video. Take care.